Welcome to This Week in Hospitality Marketing, live show number 432. I am your host, Lauren Gray. Thank you so much for joining us. If you're joining us on our TV station, the Hospitality Channel, thank you for watching it on Google, Roku, Amazon, Apple, any smart TV like LG or Samsung. Just look for the Hospitality Channel, load it, and the show is always on the free side. We do have a paid gateway for a whole lot more other content, but the show's always on the free side. For those of us watching us on the restreamings of Facebook pages of many associations and businesses and so forth, thank you so much for doing that. YouTube channel, same thing, same roster of people plus some other sums. LinkedIn is only on my profile, so hopefully we are friends and connected on LinkedIn. If not, please do so. Happy to join anybody that watches the show. And what am I missing? Oh, Twitch, if you're use Gaming Council for Media, and X, formerly Twitter, we broadcast live on there as well. So with all of that predication as to where we are, let's get started as to why we are. Our topic today is most of our topics usually breed out of fact of one is our Hospitality Marketing Club, which is our club of hospitality marketers, is a closed club for those who are already doing the business as marketers in hospitality. We talk about a lot of topics and so forth, and recently a couple of conversations came up about data sourcing. Now, we have spent a very large amount of time talking about GA4, obviously, in your own metrics and your own website traffic and all the things that you can do with the traffic that you are getting. But questions come like, so if you're approaching a new market, or you're taking on a new client, or you have a hotel that is in a market that you're having done anything else before, where do you start? How do you get information that is helpful and useful for your marketing strategy? So our topic today is where to find marketing data. Old school. I know it is a wonderful benefit to have been in this industry for so long that I can remember back before we had the level of engagement with digital marketing, actually before we even had digital marketing at all, where billboards, radio, TV, printed flyers, newspaper articles, magazine articles, airplane magazines, that was the modem of communication for content. And a lot of what you needed to discover about data was traditional. We used to have services called reader board services, where people would walk around to our competitive hotels and see who they had in-house that day for meetings. They would read the boards, reader boards. And then we would know what group business we missed or lost, and we knew whether or not that would change our strategy or how we would communicate. This also goes back to the days that salespeople had a loftier mission because they were really responsible for the outside sourcing of business. Transient business was really relied upon brand contribution and the ability to actively engage in the community. So you were represented when people came into the market. They saw that you were supporting the community and so forth. Like, oh, I didn't know there was a XYZ hotel there or whatever. A softball team sponsorships and so forth. I don't know. We're all means of getting our name out into the community, as also ways of making people aware of us. Back in those heady days of limited access, you had limited places to get data. One of the best places was your local Chamber of Commerce. Go in, see what businesses were also signed up with the Chamber of Commerce, see if there was reasons to communicate or reach out to them. For salespeople, it was a big avenue opportunity of looking at what businesses to go and ask if they would like to create a negotiated contract, if they had hotel business that they needed to have room rate for, and so forth. Another item of salespeople that was a high value, which was often the catalyst for why a salesperson was hired, was their Rolodex, an old technique of things where your business cards were either stapled to it or handwritten onto little index cards that were on a carousel. And that was your contacts. And believe me, salespeople walked out the door with them. That was their asset. If they walked in the door with it, they brought a whole new bevy of potential people that they would be doing business with for their new hotel. So a lot of times people were brought into sales teams primarily about who they knew. Go figure. I should drink that with the left side logoed. Our holographic logo, actually. So anyways, going to getting data. Now, obviously, if you inherit a site and you have the metrics that are there, depending on how well they track their metrics, and we've gone, and like I said, many conversations about that, you have a good sense of who has been engaging with your website to some degree, and you have some data and so forth. And in our now current age of GA4, demographic data is thin pickings and not really super accurate. As we've discussed, Google tends to fractionally go over sampling percentages. Um, and so the data is very sampled, it's very circumstantial. It's certainly not what I would consider lean on data when it comes to demographics. It's meant to give you a taste of some of the indications of the demographics that are engaging with your website. That's not the real purpose of GA4 anymore, or analytics from Google. It's, as we've said before, it's customer content generation, customer audience generation, building audiences of what they do on your website. But again, going back to the core question of what do you do if you don't have this data? What if you need to understand the market? Well, there are some really cool places that still exist for their profound reasons that can give you a tremendous amount of data. Now, if you're approaching taking over a hotel, you're going to talk to people that are leaving, as helpful as they may be. You're going to get whatever data they have. Of course, you're going to have whatever business they were doing, or context of the business they're doing. You hope that gets left behind. Sadly, when you're deflagging or reflagging, that data goes with the brand. They consider it their data. So all of their list of group businesses they do and everything, their contact, he walks out the door with the brand, should that be the choice of the ownership that's taking it over. But there are still other traditional sources of data that are profoundly valuable for a marketing perspective. Getting a lay of the land, understanding the destination, understanding who comes to the destination, when did they come to the destination, what types of people come to the destination. So we've already mentioned the Chamber of Commerce is a great source. Well, they are more than just a bulletin board of businesses that have decided to pay money to say they're part of the Chamber of Commerce. They're a good litmus test as to the active engagement health of the business community in your market. Some chambers of commerce are very figureheadish and lack the engagement with their businesses because they show no value perspective for them. And so they don't have a heavy roster. It also means they don't have a heavy representation of data that they share with the business community. There are free versions of content that the Chamber of Commerce offers, and then there is paid for, meaning you are a member of the Chamber of Commerce, that information is shared with you as well. My first recommendation for any business, join your Chamber of Commerce. It is an expense, but it is a worthy expense. It does several things for you. One, it solidifies your commitment to the community that you are now a part of. Two, it gives you an open pipeline of a means of communication with people that you wouldn't have an excuse to go to and talk to before. It's great lead gen, let's put it that way. And three, it's an active representation of you being in the community to the public. Those three reasons alone is justification for whatever expenses related to the Chamber of Commerce. Any aspect of that would be a high value to you. The next level up, depending upon your destination and the value of your destination as to whether there's a needed organization for this, is the Tourist Development Council, TDC. These associations are related to driving business to your market. They're the ones that are out to actively create an awareness of your destination for transient business. Any business in general is what they're trying to highlight. They're trying to highlight the events and activities in your destination, the unique amenities of your destination, the convenience of your destination. They're trying to solicit other locations to collaborate in referring to them for places of destination. They create collaborations with other destinations. They do a lot. That's a great organization. One that you pay for, usually in bed tax or in some sort of community pool of finances that go towards their existence. And it's usually by taxations. The next group of people, and I'm going to lump these together in the discussion here in just a minute, is your Convention Visitor Bureau, the CVB. This organization is a lot more robust because they are, for all intents and purposes, really the sales arm of your destination. They're out there trying to garner group business or convention businesses to your market. They're trying to highlight the value proposition of bringing in larger groups for venues that you may have in your destination market so that you can benefit from the influx of people for a particular event or conference. For that reason, they do a tremendous amount of research as well. The TDC and the CVB do great research on identifying data. Now, I've seen great CVBs, I've seen good CVBs, I've seen average CVBs, and I've seen bad CVBs. CVBs, in my perspective, tend to go through a life cycle. They have the wherefore to be very good, depending upon who's engaged with them, who's in charge of them, who's in their team, how it operates like any good business. Good leadership creates good business. And then I've seen CVBs begin to falter as those great people get recognized by other CVBs and they're acquired. Their replacement may not be as fluent in what they were responsible for as the previous person, and they begin to falter, especially if their senior leadership begins to leave and the change of the leadership changes the perspective and goals of the TDC or the CVB. Then all of a sudden they turn into a good CVB, average CVB. I've seen CVBs goes from great to bad in one stroke by depending on who was sitting in the lead chair. Sadly, they are all reliant on the monies that are given to them via taxation, bed tax, and so forth, to outwardly pursue group business for your destination, as we said. For that reason, they do a lot of data collection to validate their sales pitches. Why the choice that they are offering is the better choice in consideration to potential group businesses and conferences. What are the things that make the destination so valuable for getting groups and people there? And for this reason, they have a lot of demographic data, demand traffic data, because what they can do that you can't as an individual hotel is go to all of the hotels that are providing money to them for bed tax and literally find out information from them that they can aggregate, anonymize it, so you don't know that Bob's Hotel A had certain occupancies or what have you, but the data is generalized, saying, okay, we have a total inventory of X in our market at these tiers. We have X amount of hotel rooms at luxury level. We have X amount of rooms at above mid. We have below mid, whatever. We have these many hotels. And from that, they can begin to tell you data associated with the demands of people going to come to the market. So too with the TDC. They work very lockstep together as to this data. Why am I touting all these for data sources? Because, as I mentioned earlier, there's the free version of content, and then there's the paid version. Now, with the TDC and the CVB, they have to consistently show why and how they're spending the taxpayer money. They have to validate their existence in productivity of how much business they drive, and productivity in what information they're sharing to help all the businesses thrive. So there is a lot of information that's generally consistently offered by the CVBs and TDCs to its constituents, the hotels in the industry and so forth, to let them know what they know, their demographics, their seasonal demands, their information related to durations of flights, their sources of business markets. There's a whole lot of data that they willingly offer to tell you more about their destination, not just to the benefit of the hotels and businesses in their destination, but to those people interested in coming to the destination. For that reason, it's a fount of information as a cold start to your research to a market. It is a part of my direct first steps when taking over either a new client or being responsible for a new hotel in a new market. That's one of my go-to sources is what's the TDC data? What do they have? Do they have a TDC that represents them? If so, how much? Sometimes TDCs encapsulate a larger area, more of a destination region than a particular township or destination in particular. Whatever data they have, I want to have it. They'll tell me trends. They'll tell me traffic. They'll tell me demographics. They'll tell me tons of information about ways that I can better understand who I'm potentially going to look at marketing. Now, we'll talk about the next step with that in just a second. We don't take it at all face value. We take it as a source of data. With the chamber, there is the paid and the free version. The paid version usually will get you better, more specific data. The free version tends to give you more of older data. Useful, but not necessarily the most recent data. But it is still helpful. It's reaffirmational data that can be compared to the other data that's being offered by the TDCs and CVBs to make sure there's a continuity and consistency between what everybody's saying. Because there will be variances. If a TDC encapsulates a larger area, they're going to include all the variables of the included area. One destination may have a higher demand of a particular type than your destination, but your chamber can help purify that by looking at what it says is actually coming into your particular market compared to the generalized data of the TDC or the CVB. For that reason, it's a good litmus test to have. And if you do already have the option or the influence to have them join the chamber, then asking for access to the data that then is provided to you is also incredibly helpful. It's more recent data. What are some other sources of data and that you can use to begin to aggregate your perspective analysis, which is what I really call the first step? You sit back with a big whiteboard that's all clean of stuff, and you start sticking up stuff that you find and know. It's not necessarily in a structured content. It's just sources of data Like, do we know this? Do we know this? Do we know this? And one of them is your airport that feeds your market. Now, you may be fortunate enough to have an airport actually in your market, but more than likely, unless you're in one of those designated areas, you will have an airport that services your market. There has been a huge transition in the industry recently with the lack of pilots, that there has been a lot of regional airports, smaller ones, that have lost their carrier services because of lack of traffic and the need of the pilots to be trained upwards to larger aircraft. And so we're seeing that in the news persistently now, that these really pretty, well-funded, brand new looking airports in what used to be regional demand markets have no carriers going to them that warrant the investment of the airport. It's a shame. It's fun to go over and go to these places and see, such and such international airport, and it's like, really? Wow, okay. It's true, because that designation has to maintain a certain structure into it and so forth, so they can get international flights. The problem is there's no international carriers coming to them, and there's no domestic carriers, the large carriers that are feeding them as well. They may get some regional carriers, which usually are great for where they come from and go to, which is you. So those are data aspect, but that's not what we're talking about today. What we're really talking about is the data that the airports can provide you. There is free data, which is helpful, albeit sometimes delayed. It depends on which airport. I've seen airports be right to the last month with data, and I've seen other airports where they're last year's data. It really depends on the aggressiveness of the airport sharing the data. I don't think there's a hard and steadfast rule as to the limitations of when they do or don't share data, but I do see a contrast as some airports offering incredibly relevant current data and other airports offering a relatively obscure, generalized, older data. So you really have to go look and see what they have to offer. But the value of the data from the airports is it gives you lift. Now, if anybody's had properties in the Caribbean islands or any place that the airlift is the traffic to you, that is the lifeline of your dependence on how many people are going to land on your island. So there's a whole nother perspective we can talk about island focus with airlift. Not necessarily for this conversation, just to know in general, the data that an airport can provide you, where the flights are coming from, where the flights are going to, how often can somebody get from certain places to you. There's a whole amount of data there. Now, there's an advanced way of doing this, and we've talked about it in the previous show with APIs. And we're going to talk about some APIs today too, where you can get airlift data via API, where you can literally go to services that will give you the amount of the types of planes, the amount of seats on those planes, the amount that they were filled on those planes, and their flight schedules and frequencies and everything else, so you can calculate actual airlift from different markets. There's a caveat with the airlift data, which we'll get to when we start talking about the APIs. So we've talked about Chamber of Commerce. We've talked about TDCs, Tourist Development Councils. We talked about CVBs, Convention Visitor Bureaus, as great sources of data. We've also talked about whatever you inherited from the property that you're stepping into, and if from a new marketer's perspective for a new client, whatever data that the hotel, that business that you're taking over can share with you of their historicals and so forth, and of course their web traffic and so forth. So these are the accumulation of the kind of old school data sources that can be used. Now, stepping a little bit towards the digital side of things, other than the website content or website analytics, is you can go and do some very general, broad-brushed sources of data. One of the easiest, fastest, fish in a barrel kind of ones is Google Trends. It's one of the ones that I go to just to understand what kind of level of engagement goes to the destination. You can simply go to Google Trends, put in your destination, and see how many people are looking for it. Then you can start getting it out to like, okay, so this is all the traffic of people looking for this destination. And it'll give you some suggestions. Sometimes you discover through it that there are certain events or certain times of year, because of certain things, Christmas or whatever, holidays perhaps maybe, that there's a different demand cycle. And it'll show you that there's options to what you've asked to look at. I would then place against it, and I usually do, hotels in kind of thing, so that you can see how much traffic people are looking for hotels when they're also looking for the destination. How relevant is it to one or the other? Like, okay, this is all the people looking for this destination. How many of those people are looking for hotels? And you can break it down from there based on the suggestions as to if there's other things that would warrant or should warrant your attention. And again, going back to that whiteboard discussion, you stick them up. These are things we found from this, just general things. Okay, here's our information from the CVB, here's our information from the TDC, you make this loose file, our sticky pins on our sticky notes on a whiteboard of data that you're finding. We tend to find that people come during these times. We tend to find that these are the families that come. This is the type of the income they come. This is how long they stay. This is usually ADR in the market. And you begin to just aggregate this data. You're not making comparisons or contrasts quite yet. You're just getting the data together with similar KPIs. Occupancy is a good one. Demographics is a good one. Feeder markets is a good one. Business cycles is a good one. These are kind of common themes in your data collection from these sources. And you put them all together. Now, I wouldn't say that we've exhausted the old school data, but we've certainly tapped into its largest resources. There are a tremendous amount of other resources to do, but let's get into some of the next step resource gatherings that you can do. The next is to see what data can be gotten from sources that are relevant to the old school data you got to, like airlift. Some other ones that are of interest that most people don't often think of first and directly is weather. How much does the weather affect the demand to business? Obviously, those that have winter cycle have an impact on their demand. One market might be where it goes dead and quiet because it's wintertime. Other markets go incredibly alive in demand because it's wintertime. Think Vail and Aspen when you do that. So for those reasons, you look at the weather. Now, APIs, these are the technical ways of connecting data source. You can go to platforms. Now there's free data, which is old and relatively stale, but historically relevant for demand patterns. Or you can pay and get more relevant current data. But let's go back to the airport API example. So I can go tap an API for the airport that feeds the market, if it's lucky enough to be in the market even, as to all the flights at any time, whichever month, that come in, from where, go to where, and occupancies of those. Now, you can go to your airport, which I should say, there's the general information, and then there is the information that you can look particularly for. And what I mean by that is I'm looking for markets that we consistently have a direct flight to. I'm looking for how much of our traffic goes to a hub like Atlanta or Miami or Chicago, or because our airline systems, except for Southwest, operates on a hub system where you might be in a region that feeds to the hub and the hub goes somewhere, which also means people coming from the hub come to you. That's when you begin to look at how many people fly from the hub, and then you determine with other data where they came from to get to the hub to get to you. But anyway, so you have this API that you're plugging in. Now, what do you mean with an API? What do you do with it? Okay. Google Sheets has turned into an incredibly valuable tool. And on the podcast today, we're going to actually talk about an interface that allows you to go just tap APIs. And first off, I must say, I was overwhelmed by the amount of willing open APIs that are out there. I thought I would have to pay for every bit of information that I wanted. And instead, I found out there was a tremendous amount of information willingly given, weather being one of them. And we'll get to that. Airports, they know that they have as a payable asset. So they're less likely to give you a lot of free data. Usually you get that from your airport directly as a business in that market. They won't give it to you willingly, although I have gone to airport sites and they have willingly had PowerPoint presentations about their historical airlift and carrier lift and value proposition, which is often used by the CVBs, which also has their airport data, and TDCs, who also has the airport data, as a means of showcasing the airport's viability for anybody looking to create events that the airport would be supporting, like flying people in for whatever event you're going to run. These airports that are more willing to do this are the ones that are needing business. They're the ones that are willing to get more information out there to solicit people's interest in using their airport or for the value of the airport. The airports that have plenty of business and are doing business, they don't need the engagement as much. So because of that, they are less gratuitous with their data, let's say. But anyway, so the API, and the API is really just a code sequence. You go to their place where it says, hey, do you want an API? Great. You go to the site and it says, okay, this is the data that we have available, and this is how it's identified. Do you want to connect the API? Yes. Well, you have to then go over and connect the API to a platform that will pull the data over. This platform we're going to talk about today on the podcast, if you're interested in doing this kind of stuff, will do exactly that. You simply take their API key, your API key, you swap it to saying, this is who I am, click, this is who they are, click. And now all of a sudden, you get a Google Sheet that is itemized according to the data fields that they indicated and wrote according to the data particular to whatever, usually dates and versus segments and so forth. And you get all this pile of raw data, which is really neat because then you get to go over and see that everybody's flying in. All the data, the people that are flying in, the carriers that are flying in from and to and where and so forth. And you can begin to create pivot tables easy enough. Pivot tables are pretty much nonstop ones now that you can find them in Excel, you can find them in Google Sheets. You just drop it and say, compare this to this, and it'll change that column for you. The other is that you can create formulas that will take lumps of data and you make conditions saying, if this carrier, by flight lift, if this number is above 60% carrier lift or 80% occupancy for better ways of understanding it, then I want it this color. And then you can see now graphically where more of your lift comes in, more of your lift, more carriers go out and what have you. The idea is that you're looking for patterns and trends and the amount of contribution that is given by these. So, for instance, if you go over and take this API for an airline or for an airport and you put it into a Google Sheet and you start looking at, well, who brings in what lift and when, and you see the peak time. So you now match that. You begin to match that to your business trends that you know from either the historical occupancy numbers that you inherited for taking over the hotel, or if you're an agency stepping in, what they tell you is their business cycle. And one of the fun things is just you begin to see when the airlines begin to add more mechanical to the lift to your airport. Airlines are incredibly advanced when it comes to their strategies of allotments and logistics as to where they put multi-million-dollar aircraft for occupancies and so forth. And it's not that when they add more aircraft, that means you're going to get more business. It can and usually does, but not all the time. What it does do is indicates when they feel like there's an opportunity for revenue generation. By adding more lift, they can carry more people. They can create demand, which is something we often say can't be done for hotels. They can create demand by adding more lift, because if people see, for instance, more frequency of flights from point A to your point B, that might open up a potential where people that didn't consider coming to you now will from point A. And that, logistically from the airport, they have these particular planes. They have no eminent area where them to go. It's more beneficial to think that they can increase the business level from that incrementally a certain percentage, which is much more valuable than the smaller incremental percentage of growth that they would put it by putting the airplanes elsewhere. It doesn't mean that they're tapping an unknown resource. They're developing a demand that didn't exist. It's fascinating to watch airlines work when it comes to that control of supply and demand. But anyways, the idea is that you now have cultivated a seed of the difference of data, that now you're looking beyond just the general stats that have been offered by the airport to now more of what the actual numbers are in a way that you can use the numbers. Here's total carrier lift to my market for the month of January. Here's total carrier lift for a month of February. Now you have some sense of sourcing for it. So if you were just to do simple calculations of math, you can go look and say, okay, if we have 10,000 rooms in our market and we have 2,000 people flying in every 72 hours, not that everybody needs a hotel room, but usually 80% or more from flights do need hotel rooms, then where do they stay? And how much of percentage demand is for that? And which carrier is that? Because then that can change into your marketing strategy of saying, okay, let's go over and help target by saying that anybody that follows American Airlines that lives in geographic A for the month of February looking for hotel rooms, we want to target. Or better yet, anything that engaged with our hotel for the month of February from geographic A, let's make sure they know about flight deals in addition to our hotel deals, which we often do. Why not share the commonality of the information? There's 4 spectrums to travel, as we've always talked about. There's a spectrum of accommodation, a spectrum of transportation, spectrum of entertainment, spectrum of food. We can influence all of those by how we contribute to the content to the people that are looking. As they designate what they're willing to spend for accommodations with us or the query about accommodations with us, we can also share with them the other things that they need to consider when it comes to transportation costs. It could be flight prices. It could be, flight deals. It could be gas prices. It could be lots of things. And then food discounts and offers in restaurants, not only that we can offer ourselves if we happen to have a restaurant in our organization, but also restaurants and things surrounding that they shouldn't miss and what kind of prices to expect from that. Entertainment wise, things are tickets and entrance fees, those types of things. The more you can share about those, the more they rely upon you as a source of information, and less necessity for them to keep venturing out and finding more sources of information. They'll still do it. They'll still look for affirmational information. They'll still look at other places out of curiosity and interest. You don't get to harbor them and cage them, but they will come back to you, which is the more important. You tether them. It's not about encapsulating them, capturing them. It's about tethering them, bringing them back to you, because they've now started to equate their trip sourced from your location. That's the value of what a hotel does to anybody traveling. The hotel, wherever anybody stays, is the center of their trip perspective to your destination, because everything revolves around from and to you. The sooner you can establish that, the more you can establish that, the easier it is to have them book with you, regardless of the rate variations that may be between you and your competitors in market. So, going back to the data, the API thing for airlines is very helpful in a lot of ways. If airlines have some aspect, which most in any place does, don't forget also that airports aren't just the major carrier airports that we're familiar with. There is a tremendous amount of municipal airports and commercial type airports, executive airports. These have their own breed of users. Yes, you like to think of them as the jet setting and expensive people, and for the most part, that is easily possible for that. But the reality of it is there's a lot of people that have planes instead of cars, and they travel that way. The little Cessna 170s and what have you. And yes, you're not talking about your average medium income family to be able to afford a plane. But you are talking about a set of people that do need accommodations. If you're the type of hotel that would be interested in staying with, based on proximity, based on value proposition, based on time of year, based on the event that they're coming in for, whatever. So those don't discount those. Also, too, is, and this goes again for more an affluent crowd, those that don't necessarily own the planes that they fly in, or they lease the planes solely for themselves. There is a huge amount of growth in the carrier business of having access to those planes that get leased out for people to pick a seat on. It's not cheap. It is a level of, but then now you're talking about two different categories: the affluent person that wants to do it personally, and then the corporate person that needs the flexibility of their schedule and the convenience of it, and the company's willing to pay for it. That's a whole nother group of people for corporate travel. And again, depending upon your destination, depending upon what you're selling, depending upon what time of year all this is, these turn into very viable resources to explore. So that's the airport API kind of stuff, and the airport data. I mean, to give you some sense of just value propositions to this, a lot of the hotels around airports and so forth, all are pretty much within rate parity and also to offers. The real difference maker between a lot of airport hotels is who gets in front of who first for the person that needs their services. That's really about it. Brand affinity sometimes comes in, but there's so much brand apathy right now. Everybody's a member of every organization. And I'm sorry, a free bottle of water after staying with a hotel for 12 or 10 times doesn't necessarily give me the loyalty that I need to say, oh gosh, no, I'll go over and stay at the Marriott because, I'm eventually going to get that bottle of water. If the price is better in Hilton, and the Hilton airport's right next to the airport, or the Hilton hotel's right next to the airport, right by the Marriott, sometimes in the same parking lot, go figure. And the same shuttle gets used, maybe go figure. No difference, same thing. So for that reason, getting in front of a guest before your competitors in market is the real trick to getting the capture. So some of the benefits of this is the brands hurt themselves. When you're doing anything about finding out about a hotel, if they offer a park and go or park and fly or whatever their term is for their offer, you basically have to discover which hotels are around the airport, what airport hotels or hotels near the airport X. You get the list and you go through with them, and you go to their website and you see if they show that, yes, we have a Go Park and Fly or Park and Go or whatever, and you go look at it. And this is where they fall down. Most of the brands don't give enough space to the hotel to describe the terms related to the offer. They just simply say they have it. And if you go to the click to book, even there, the limitation of the characters for the actual code of what's being done is limited. And so they don't get to tell you that you can leave your car there for 3 days, or that you can leave it before you leave as long as you stay one night, or you can leave it there as long as you stay the night you get back, or whatever it is. Okay. The terms and conditions. Making something that they can be available to that shows that you have details with it. It shows that you have breakfast available to it, or early breakfast for it, or shuttle service, and how often the shuttle service goes. Giving them a helpful link that says, here's the current flight statuses, delays, cancellations, arrivals, as a link to a page that, more content about that. Parking, the idea that the fact that if they don't want you to park and go, but they like the proximity of your hotel to the airport, what's the parking lot at the hotel? So, or at the airport. So if they stay at your hotel, don't use the Park and Fly, but decide they're going to pull into the airport conveniently to avoid traffic and park there. What's the parking lot situation like? All of those things are value assets to conveying ahead of your competitors the same offer that your competitors are offering. So it gives you a sense of that. So going back to the topic at hand of data collection, I mentioned weather. It's funny. I've told people this, and they either look at me like, why would you ever do that? Or we do something like it, or yeah, I know what you mean. And that is daily logs. When I was GM of hotels, I would always have a daily log, like a ship's log, captain's start date, that talked about the day. Just, hey, it was this weather, blah, blah, blah. We were short one housekeeper. We had a slow return on rooms. We had a backup on arrivals, whatever the circumstances. And you get to consistent as to things you talk about. So there's consistency of reviewing, like, occupancies, ADRs, and, end of the days and so forth. You have that kind of general log just for yourself that you can flip through and look at what the day looked like. Groups that were coming in, problems with groups, weather situation, logistics issues, whatever that you had, so that next year, when you're looking at what you're anticipating coming up, you can look back to last year and say, did anything influence it? Like, especially when you look at numbers and say, oh my gosh, we had terrible occupancy last year. We have great occupancy compared to last year. Yeah, last year we had a hurricane coming through at that time and nobody was here. We had to shut down. Those things sometimes get lost, especially when you have a change of the guard and the people that were there then aren't there now. And for that reason, the data gets lost. Well, a log is nice. Well, weather's one of those. We know weather influences a tremendous amount of the business cycle that we have. If the weather is predicated to be bad for an arrival, we see cancellations, especially if we're a transient destination that is reliant upon what people do once they're here. If you have a beach resort and people come to the beach resort only to have a nasty storm and rain the whole time they're there, likelihood is in the cancellation window, they'll cancel unless they're too obligated, like they already have the flight tickets and what have you. And at that point, they're in for a penny, in for a pound. But for those drive market people that have options, they'll hopefully reschedule it, but most likely at least cancel it. Weather has a huge influence. When you start looking at data and you take the data of weather and you compare it against the historic pattern of occupancies and demand and all the other data that we're talking about collecting, you begin to see a pattern of influence that the weather has. I know it sounds like a very Captain Obvious statement, but they have different impacts. Strangely enough, when done to a deeper, longer level, the weather at the source is more of an influencer on booking pace than the influence of the weather at the destination. Case in point, when it gets bitterly cold up north and it stays bitterly cold, you are now officially in winter. There is no forecast in the near future or in the far future that's going to be much better than what you have right now. That's when people begin to look at the definitive choices of coming down to the south or someplace warmer, at least some change of venue. We know that we've done it for years. Old school was we used to have our ads set and ready that when the weather snapped up north and stayed cold, that's when we did our "Don't You Wish You Were Here" campaigns up in New York, Boston, Massachusetts, Jersey, all those places, because that's when the ones that weren't just snowbirds that came down before it all happened, but are like the ones that go, okay, we got to get out of here. We got to get some warmth for a little while. to make sure that we can live through the whole winter process. That's when we did the campaigns. Same true, but now for a different strategic purpose when it comes to marketing. If I can see those patterns of weather influence and how they affect both the source of the business and the destination of business, I can better tune the content that I'm creating to be relevant to people in the geographies that makes the impact, with timely messages of offers and information that help them get motivated to get to the point of ZMOT, reserve moment of transaction, to make that conversion. And it's a progressive conversation. It's just not flashing rates and dates. Yes, there's certain channels that you do just pump out the now's the time, click here thing. But more often than not, it's accumulation of a long string of dialogue, content offering, engagements, usually done through social first, then into paid campaigns for amplification, then into content sourcing on your website for authentication. And you do this to best influence people to make their choices. This is the value proposition of the data. So weather has a huge deal to it. And it's fun to make those comparisons when you start overlaying your weather data to your cycles of demand, how in sync by cause and effect they are. It's not like weather goes bad, something else goes bad. I mean, it's close, especially for cancellations, but more of it's like weather change, and then you see the impact of it, kind of like a alternate waves. The idea of using this type of data gives you a good sense of what you need to do for marketing. So going into all the sources of CAP of data that we're talking about, you look at your TDC data and it's amazing. I just looked the other day at one place that showed its location, and as a favor to anybody looking at its site, literally showed all the carrier flights and what carrier airline went to those flights, seasonal and non-seasonal. Oh my gosh, that's fish in a barrel. Let's just circle every one of those geographic locations, because some of them were hubs, others were not. And just say those are going to be our targeted points. So instead of marketing to the entire United States in the hopes that somebody's going to be interested in coming to our hotel, let's first start with the places we know we already have lift from. Okay, this isn't a drive market decision. This is an airlift decision. Let's look at all the places we already have airlift from, make sure we have active running campaigns in those markets based on the history of that feeder market's value. That's the key element to it. Is it's great that you want to advertise in Chicago, but people in Chicago, when you look at your folio, should you hopefully have that wasn't taken with you if you took over the hotel, but if you're coming into it and you have historical data, when do people from Chicago mostly come in? And you begin to see that, then you go to your website traffic and see when geographically people in Chicago were looking to come to you. And then you look at your data of your airlift, of seeing the carrier lift that goes to and from Chicago, and you begin to see a sequence of similarities between all of these to go, what we need to do? We need to start engaging Chicago in this date sequence with this content already developed on our website to go to and feature and point out. And we need to target it along with the airline carrier lift time when they start offering lift from there, and when they can book tickets. Remember, it's not just this lift starts and that's when you start. It has to go well before that, because the minimum window for buying tickets should at least be 14 days, if not more. Usually 21, 22 is the days that most people tend to buy tickets from. And depending upon the distance of the travel, that even goes farther out. Okay. If it's shorter travel, it goes farther in. These are all trends we know. These are all things that you learn. If you don't have the data already to identify, this is the data that teaches you this. And so you begin to look at it saying, we need to have these campaigns set up for Chicago. What about this content related to things on our website specific for the things that Chicago travels for? If we have geocentric rates and so forth that need to be amplified, we need to talk about social dialogue as a lead-in for communication engagement, then amplify it up with paid campaigns. Then we have to go over and put our paid campaigns pointing to our website with the content to it. And we need to keep those specifically targeted. And let's create a KPI threshold of the conversions and how much money we're willing to spend based on what we think we're going to get, based on the traffic volume that we know exists in this market. These are the modalities of targeting your marketing strategies. And you do that for all the other places that have the airlift that you already have identified. That's one modality of using this type of data. The other is just the general awareness that certain people love your market. They come there for certain reasons during certain times of the year. And there's certain things in your market that people are very interested in when they are there, outside of the events that may drive them, the time of year and the things that they can do during that time of year. Make a list from all of the TDC data, CVB data, chamber data, your airport data, your inherited data that you've gotten from the the property, should you be able to accumulate that it wasn't taken away from with the previous ownership, if you're new to handling over the market, if you're new walking into the market. This advice is not just for the marketers that step into a hotel. This advice is good for anybody stepping into a role in the hotel that requires their awareness of this data. If you're going in as a marketing manager, if you're going in as a revenue manager, if you're going in as a operations manager, whatever it may be, you need to know this kind of data. So there you have it. My name is Loren Gray. Thank you for the privilege of your time, and I look forward to talking to you all next week.